There's a country within a country. It has its own army, its own weapons depots buried deep underground, its own missile stockpile that exceeds the entire military arsenal of most European nations, its own hospitals, schools, television stations, social welfare programs, and courts, its own intelligence network that operates across 5 continents, its own foreign policy, its own wars, and yet, officially on paper, in the eyes of the international community, it is not a country at all. It is a militia, a political party, a terrorist organization, depending on which government you ask, a resistance movement, depending on which street corner in Beirut you are standing on. Its name is Hezbollah, the Party of God, and it is, without question, one of the most powerful non-state military forces in human history. Let that land for a moment. Not a nation, not a superpower, not a centuries-old empire. A militia born in the rubble of a war-torn country, funded by a revolutionary government, built brick by brick over 4 decades, that now possesses more missiles than most NATO members, that fought the Israeli military, one of the most sophisticated and battle-hardened armies on earth, to a standstill, that has sent fighters to Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and beyond, that controls Lebanese politics with an iron grip, while technically just being one party among many. How does something like this happen? How do you take a ragtag collection of young fighters in the mountains of eastern Lebanon and turn them into a force that the United States, Israel, and the entire Western world regard as one of the most dangerous armed groups on the planet? That is the story we are about to tell. And I promise you, it is stranger, darker, more human, and more consequential than anything you have read in a headline or seen in a news segment. Because Hezbollah's story is not just the story of a militia. It is the story of Lebanon, a small, beautiful, catastrophically unlucky country that has been used as a battlefield by every major power in the region for the last 50 years. It is the story of Iran's revolutionary ambitions and how they found a perfect host in Lebanese soil. It is the story of Israel's greatest military miscalculations. It is the story of what happens when people feel so abandoned, so humiliated, and so desperate that they will follow anyone who picks up a gun and says, "I will fight for you." Stay with me. This one goes deep. Before there was Hezbollah, there was Lebanon. And before you could understand what Hezbollah became, you need to understand what Lebanon was, what it still is, underneath all the devastation, what it could have been in a kinder world. Lebanon is a country of extraordinary physical beauty. The Mediterranean coastline sweeping beneath snow-capped mountains, cedar forests that are ancient enough to appear in the Bible. The city of Beirut, once called the Paris of the Middle East, with its layered architecture, its outdoor cafes, its bookshops and universities and nightlife, and that particular Mediterranean light that turns everything golden in the late afternoon. Lebanon is also a country of extraordinary human diversity. In a country barely larger than Connecticut, you have Maronite Christians, Sunni Muslims, Shia Muslims, Greek Orthodox, Druze, Armenians, Palestinians, and dozens of smaller communities, each with their own traditions, their own neighborhoods, their own political parties, their own militias, because in Lebanon, political parties and militias have often been the same thing. This diversity was supposed to be Lebanon's strength. The Lebanese had built a political system, the National Pact of 1943, designed to balance power between communities. The president would always be a Maronite Christian, the prime minister always a Sunni Muslim, the speaker of parliament always a Shia Muslim. Power shared, tension managed, a fragile peace maintained. For a while, it worked. In the 1950s and 1960s, Beirut genuinely was the cultural and financial capital of the Arab world. Lebanese banks managed the region's oil wealth. Lebanese universities educated a generation of Arab intellectuals. Lebanese fashion, music, and cuisine defined Arab sophistication. But underneath the glittering surface, the foundations were cracking. The Palestinian question exploded into Lebanon in 1970. King Hussein of Jordan, in a brutal crackdown known as Black September, expelled the Palestinian Liberation Organization and its fighters from Jordan. They relocated to Lebanon, bringing with them their weapons, their infrastructure, their conflict with Israel, and hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees who have been living in Lebanese camps since 1948. Southern Lebanon became a launch pad for PLO attacks on Israel. Israel retaliated with airstrikes and ground operations. Lebanese civilians were caught in the middle. The Lebanese state, already fragile, began to buckle under the weight of a conflict it had never asked for and could not control. And then, in 1975, Lebanon imploded entirely. The Lebanese Civil War began as a clash between Palestinian fighters and Lebanese Christian militias. Within months, it had sucked in every community, every faction, every neighboring country with an interest in Lebanon's fate. Syria intervened. Israel intervened. The PLO fought. The Christians fought. The Sunnis fought. The Druze fought. And through all of this, here's the thing that matters most for our story. The Shia Muslims of Lebanon were largely left out. The Shia were the largest single community in Lebanon. They were concentrated in two areas, the Bekaa Valley in the east and the south of the country, the very areas being bombed by Israel in its campaigns against the PLO. They were also historically the poorest, most marginalized community in Lebanese society. The National Pact gave them the least powerful position, the Speaker of Parliament. They had little land, little political influence, and little protection. They had grievances piled upon grievances, and grievances, in the right conditions, are the most explosive fuel. Before Hezbollah, there was a man named Musa al-Sadr. Remember this name, because without Musa al-Sadr, there is no Hezbollah. Without Musa al-Sadr, the political and spiritual mobilization of Lebanese Shia Muslims that made Hezbollah possible simply does not happen. Musa al-Sadr was an Iranian-born cleric of Lebanese origin, tall, charismatic, with a beard and turban and eyes that people who men described as simultaneously warm and absolutely certain. He arrived in Lebanon in 1959 and immediately began doing something that nobody had done before for the Lebanese Shia. He organized them. He built schools. He built clinics. He went into the poorest Shia villages in the south, the ones that had been neglected for generations, and he told people something that sounds simple but was, in the context of that society, revolutionary. You matter. You have dignity. You deserve better than this. He founded the movement of the deprived. He created Amal, a Shia political and later military movement. He gave Lebanese Shia Muslims a political identity, a sense of collective power, a reason to believe that their lives and their suffering had weight. He also began what would become a defining thread of Lebanese Shia identity: resistance to Israel. As Israeli military operations in southern Lebanon displaced tens of thousands of Shia civilians, people who had nothing to do with the PLO but happened to live in the wrong place, al-Sadr channeled their anger and their pain into political and eventually military organization. And then, In 1978, he disappeared. He flew to Libya for a meeting with Muammar Gaddafi. He was never seen again. To this day, his fate is unknown, almost certainly murder on Gaddafi's orders, though the exact circumstances have never been proven. His body was never found. His killers, if they were ever identified, were never prosecuted. The disappearance of Musa al-Sadr did not destroy the movement he had built. It transformed into something more powerful, a martyrdom myth, a sacred memory, a founding wound around which Lebanese Shia identity would crystallize for generations. He had lit the fire. Others would feed it until it burned bright enough to be seen across the entire world. June 1982. Israel invades Lebanon. The official justification is the attempted assassination of Israel's ambassador to Britain by the Abu Nidal organization, a Palestinian militant group that was actually violently opposed to the PLO. The real motivation is more complex. Israeli Defense Minister Ariel Sharon, a hawk of extraordinary ambition and ruthlessness, wants to destroy the PLO once and for all, reshape Lebanese politics by installing a friendly Christian government, and perhaps even sign a peace treaty with Lebanon. The initial Israeli advance is breathtaking in its speed and power. Israeli armor rolls through southern Lebanon. The PLO is battered. By mid-June, Israeli forces have surrounded Beirut itself. What follows over the next several months is one of the most controversial chapters in Israeli military history, the Siege of Beirut. The massive bombardment of West Beirut, the evacuation of PLO fighters under international supervision, and then, in September 1982, the massacre at Sabra and Shatila, where Lebanese Christian militias allied with Israel entered Palestinian refugee camps and slaughtered hundreds, possibly over 1,000 unarmed civilians, including women and children, while Israeli forces controlled the perimeter and critics argued allowed it to happen. The images that emerged from Sabra and Shatila shocked the world. They shocked Israel. Over 400,000 Israelis demonstrated in Tel Aviv against their own government's role in the massacre, one of the largest protests in Israeli history. And they detonated something in Lebanon. Because here is what Israel had not fully calculated. Destroying the PLO in Lebanon did not remove armed opposition to the Israeli presence. It created a new one, from a direction Israel had not expected. From the Shia south, the Shia of southern Lebanon had not been friends of the PLO. The PLO's presence in their villages had brought Israeli retaliation down on their heads for years. Some had even initially, cautiously, quietly welcomed the Israeli invasion as a removal of the PLO burden. But Israeli forces did not leave. They stayed. They occupied southern Lebanon. An occupation, anywhere in the world, at any point in history, tends to produce exactly one thing: resistance. And it was at precisely this moment, with Israeli forces occupying southern Lebanon, with the Shia community inflamed by years of displacement and now by the atrocity of Sabra and Shatila, with the Lebanese state in complete collapse, that a plane landed at Damascus airport carrying 1,500 fighters of the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. They drove into the Bekaa Valley, and Hezbollah was born. The founding of Hezbollah was not an accident. It was a deliberate, carefully planned strategic project by the Islamic Republic of Iran. Ayatollah Khomeini had a vision that went far beyond Iran's borders. He believed that the Islamic Revolution of 1979 was not just an Iranian event. It was the beginning of a global Islamic awakening. And the front line of that awakening The place where the Muslim world was most visibly, most painfully under assault was Lebanon, Palestine, the confrontation with Israel. Khomeini sent his most trusted Revolutionary Guard commanders to Lebanon with a mission: find the right people, build the right organization, create something that will carry the revolution's banner into the Arab world. They found fertile ground. Young Lebanese Shia men, many of them from the impoverished villages of the south, many of them displaced by Israeli operations, many of them burning with particular fury of people who've been told their whole lives that they don't matter, were recruited, trained, indoctrinated not just in military tactics, but in Khomeini's ideology of Velayat-e Faqih, the political theology that placed ultimate authority in the hands of supreme Islamic jurists, which meant in practice Khomeini himself and his successors. The early Hezbollah was organized around three pillars that would define forever. The first pillar was military. From the very beginning, Hezbollah was built to fight. Its fighters received serious, professional military training from Revolutionary Guard instructors. They were taught not just how to fire weapons, but how to build bombs, conduct surveillance, plan operations, disappear into civilian populations, fight from tunnels and bunkers, and survive against a vastly superior conventional military force. The second pillar was social. Hezbollah understood from day one that military power without popular support is fragile. So alongside the weapons, they built institutions, schools, clinics, welfare programs for families of fighters killed in battle, construction teams that rebuilt homes destroyed by Israeli airstrikes, a television station, Al-Mana, that would become one of the most watched channels in the Arab world. They were not just fighting for Lebanon's Shia community. They were taking care of them in ways that the Lebanese state had spectacularly failed to do. The third pillar was ideology. Hezbollah was not just a military organization or a social welfare provider. It was a movement with a complete worldview, a theology of resistance, a framework that told its members and supporters that their suffering had meaning, that their struggle was holy, that dying for the cause was not a tragedy but a transcendence. This combination, military power, social services, and ideological conviction, would prove to be extraordinarily durable. It is why, 40 years later, Hezbollah is still standing while dozens of other Lebanese militias have faded into history. But before it became the sophisticated organization it is today, it announced itself to the world in the most violent possible way. Hezbollah, newly formed and burning with revolutionary fervor, delivers its opening statement to the world. On April 18th, a suicide bomber drives a van loaded with explosives into the United States Embassy in Beirut. The explosion kills 63 people, including 17 Americans and the CIA's entire Middle East station chief and most of his team. It is at that point the deadliest attack on an American diplomatic facility in history. The world is stunned, but the worst is yet to come. October 23rd, 1983. 2 trucks, each loaded with tons of explosives, drive simultaneously into 2 separate buildings in Beirut. One carries a bomb into the barracks housing United States Marines, part of a multinational peacekeeping force. The other drives into the building housing French paratroopers. The American barracks collapse into rubble. 241 American service members are killed in seconds. It is the single deadliest day for the United States Marines since the Battle of Iwo Jima in World War II. The French barracks are similarly destroyed. 58 French paratroopers die. The world reels. Who could do this? Who had the capability, the organization, the willingness, the answer, which intelligence agencies pieced together over months, pointed to a new organization operating under Iranian direction. Hezbollah, or elements directly connected to it, had just carried out the most devastating terrorist attacks in modern history to that point. President Ronald Reagan, who had sent the Marines to Lebanon as peacekeepers, faced a devastating choice. Retaliate against whom exactly and how in a country that was barely a country anymore, or withdraw? He withdrew. Within months, the multinational force was gone from Lebanon. Hezbollah had learned something that it would never forget: that spectacular, devastating attacks on Western targets could achieve political results that conventional military operations could not. That the willingness to use suicide bombing as a weapon, the willingness to accept death as a tactic, gave a relatively small organization leverage far beyond its conventional military strength. This lesson would be studied, adapted, and exported, not just by Hezbollah, but by every jihadist group that came after it. September 11, 2001, the Madrid bombings, the London bombings. The DNA of modern mass casualty terrorism runs directly through the rubble of those Beirut barracks in October 1983. But 1983 was just the beginning. Over the following years, Hezbollah expanded its campaign of violence into new territory. The kidnapping of Western hostages in Beirut, journalists, professors, CIA officers, a Marine colonel, held for years in dark rooms, used as bargaining chips in a complex web of negotiations and ransom and political pressure. The bombings of Israeli and Jewish targets across the world. The 1992 bombing of the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires. The 1994 bombing of a Jewish community center in Buenos Aires that killed 85 people. The deadliest attack on the Jewish diaspora since the Holocaust. Hezbollah was becoming a global terror network, with tentacles that reach from South America to West Africa to Southeast Asia, with operatives embedded in Lebanese diaspora communities around the world, with fundraising, money laundering, and logistics that were, by any assessment, sophisticated and professional. And all the while, back in Lebanon, it was building something else, something that, in the long run, would prove even more powerful than bombs. Here is one of history's most painful ironies. The Israeli military occupation of southern Lebanon, which lasted from 1982 to 2000, 18 years, did more to build Hezbollah into the powerful force it became than any decision Hezbollah's own leadership ever made. Think about what an 18-year military occupation looks like on the ground. Israeli checkpoints on roads that Lebanese villagers had driven their whole lives. Israeli soldiers in the streets of southern Lebanese towns. Israeli-backed Lebanese militia, the South Lebanon Army, a largely Christian force, running the occupation zone with tactics that included arbitrary detention, torture, and collective punishment. Every village that was searched. Every young man who was stopped at a checkpoint and humiliated in front of his family. Every house that was demolished as punishment for a family member's alleged militant activity. Every airstrike that missed its target and hit a farm instead. Every funeral attended by people who had lost someone to a conflict they felt they had never asked for. Each one of these moments was a recruitment event for Hezbollah. The organization positioned itself as the only force that was actually fighting back. The Lebanese army was weak, divided, unwilling to confront Israel. The PLO was gone. The other Lebanese militias were consumed by their own internal politics. Only Hezbollah was in the south, with weapons in hand, attacking Israeli patrols, planting roadside bombs, firing rockets, extracting a price from the occupier. For the Shia community of southern Lebanon, this was not terrorism. This was resistance. This was the only form of dignity available to them. And Hezbollah understood this completely, which is why it was so careful to combine its military operations with its social programs, to present itself not as a revolutionary vanguard imposing its ideology from above, but as an organic expression of the community's own will to survive. Hezbollah also learned over 18 years of guerrilla warfare against one of the most advanced armies in the world, how to fight, how to hit and disappear, how to use Lebanon's terrain, the hills, the valleys, the villages, the centuries-old stone infrastructure, as camouflage and cover, how to build tunnels and underground networks that Israeli surveillance couldn't easily penetrate, how to gather intelligence on Israeli operations and adapt, how to sustain losses and keep fighting. This was not a summer camp for militiamen. This was a professional military education paid for in blood over 2 decades. And then, in May 2000, something happened that changed Hezbollah's story forever. Israel withdrew. Prime Minister Ehud Barak, exhausted by the cost of the occupation in Israeli lives and tired of conflict with no clear end, ordered a unilateral withdrawal from southern Lebanon. Israeli forces pulled back to the international border, the Blue Line. Within hours, Hezbollah fighters were standing at the gates of villages that Israeli forces had occupied for 18 years, welcoming the residents home. The images of that day, Lebanese civilians returned to their homes, Hezbollah flags flying where Israeli military checkpoints had stood, old women kissing the ground. Those images were broadcast across the Arab world and seen by hundreds of millions of people. The message was unmistakable. Hezbollah had done what no Arab army had ever done. It had fought Israel until Israel left, not a negotiated peace, not a ceasefire brokered by foreign powers. Actual military pressure, sustained for 2 decades, that had forced the most powerful military force in the Middle East to pack up and go home. In a region where Arab armies had been humiliated by Israel in 1948, 1956, 1967, and 1973, this was electrifying Hezbollah's credibility, not just in Lebanon, not just among Shia Muslims, but across the entire Arab and Muslim world, went through the roof. And with credibility came something even more valuable: recruits, money, political power, and weapons. Let me tell you about the weapons. Because when people talk about Hezbollah being more powerful than most countries, this is the concrete reality behind that claim. Not rhetoric, not ideology, actual hardware, actual military capability, actual destructive power measured in rockets per square kilometer. In the year 2000, when Israel withdrew from Lebanon, Hezbollah possessed perhaps a few thousand rockets, mostly short-range, unguided, relatively primitive Katyusha rockets that could hit northern Israel but couldn't reach Tel Aviv. A genuine military capability, but a limited one. By 2006, that number had grown to an estimated 12,000 to 14,000 rockets. By 2024, Western intelligence estimates put Hezbollah's arsenal at somewhere between 130,000 and 150,000 rockets and missiles. 150,000. To put that in perspective, the United Kingdom, a permanent member of the UN Security Council and one of the world's major military powers, has fewer than 500 long-range missiles in its entire inventory. France has similar numbers. Most of the world's countries have never possessed anything close to 150,000 missiles of any kind. But Hezbollah's arsenal is not just about quantity. It is about quality. And this is where the story becomes genuinely alarming. In the early years, Hezbollah's rockets were unguided. You point them in a direction, you fire them, and you hope they land somewhere useful. This is scary, but it is not precision warfare. It is terror, essentially designed to make Israeli civilians feel unsafe, to disrupt normal life, to impose a psychological cost on the Israeli population. Over the past 2 decades, Iran has been supplying Hezbollah with something far more dangerous: precision-guided munitions, missiles with GPS guidance systems, missiles that can hit a specific building in a specific city, missiles that can target military infrastructure, radar systems, air defense batteries, command centers, airfields, with accuracy measured in meters rather than kilometers. Israeli military intelligence has identified warehouses in the southern suburbs of Beirut, Hezbollah's stronghold, known as the Dahi, packed with these precision missiles. They have identified networks of underground tunnels beneath southern Lebanon, carefully engineered, reinforced, ventilated, designed to store and launch weapons while protecting them from Israeli airstrikes. Hezbollah also has anti-ship missiles, weapons capable of striking Israeli naval vessels in the Mediterranean. In the 2006 war, a Hezbollah anti-ship missile struck an Israeli corvette, the INS Hanat, killing 4 sailors and nearly sinking the ship. The Israeli Navy had not even known that Hezbollah possessed this capability. Hezbollah has anti-tank missiles, Russian-designed cornets that can penetrate the armor of any tank in the Israeli inventory. In 2006, these missiles destroyed dozens of Israeli Merkava tanks, killing their crews in engagements that shocked Israeli military planners. Hezbollah has drones. Both surveillance drones have flown deep into Israeli territory gathering intelligence, and armed drones capable of carrying and delivering explosive payloads. And in the most alarming development of recent years, there is credible intelligence suggesting that Hezbollah has been working to develop the capability to deploy chemical weapons or dirty bombs, using materials acquired through its connections to Syria, a country that used chemical weapons against its own civilian population during the Civil War. This is the arsenal of a serious military force, not a terrorist group playing its soldiers. An organization that has studied modern warfare with the seriousness of a national military, that has access to the weapons development programs of a major regional power, Iran, and that has been specifically designed, optimized, and equipped to fight Israel. Israeli military planners have said privately and occasionally publicly that a full-scale war with Hezbollah would be the most destructive conflict Israel has ever faced, more destructive than any previous war, with the potential for thousands of Israeli civilian casualties from missile attacks that Israeli air defenses, however good they are, could not fully intercept given the sheer volume of Hezbollah's arsenal. This is not a threat. It is a calculation based on the actual numbers of the weapons actually possessed. Summer 2006. The war that defined Hezbollah for a generation. It begins on July 12th with an audacious Hezbollah operation. Fighters cross the Israeli border, ambush an Israeli patrol, kill 3 soldiers, and capture 2 more, Ehud Goldwasser and Eldad Regev, dragging them back into Lebanon as bargaining chips. Israel's response is immediate and overwhelming. Prime Minister Ehud Olmert declares that Israel will wage a campaign to free the soldiers and destroy Hezbollah's military capability. The Israeli Air Force begins the most intensive bombing campaign over Lebanon since 1982. Israeli ground forces mobilize along the border. What follows over the next 34 days is one of the most studied military conflicts in recent history, not because it was the largest or the deadliest, but because of what it revealed. Israel expected a quick, decisive campaign. Its air force would destroy Hezbollah's infrastructure. Its intelligence would locate and eliminate the leadership. Its ground forces would sweep through southern Lebanon and clean out the rocket launchers. The whole thing would be over in days, maybe 2 weeks. That is not what happened. Hezbollah had spent 6 years, since the Israeli withdrawal in 2000, preparing for exactly this war. Its fighters had dug networks of tunnels beneath southern Lebanon so extensive and so well constructed that Israeli airstrikes could not destroy them. They had pre-positioned weapons and supplies in dozens of locations throughout the south. They had conducted detailed intelligence assessments of Israeli military tactics. They had trained continuously for guerrilla warfare against a conventional force. When Israeli ground forces entered southern Lebanon, they walked into something they had not anticipated. Not a disorganized militia, a disciplined, prepared, motivated military force fighting on its own ground, from prepared positions, with weapons that could kill Israeli tanks and aircraft. The Battle of Bint Jbeil became iconic. Israeli infantry units, expecting light resistance, instead encounter Hezbollah fighters who emerged from tunnels, engaged at close range, and then disappeared back underground. Israeli soldiers were killed. Israeli commanders were humiliated. The clean, swift campaign Olmert had promised the Israeli public became a grinding, bloody, inconclusive slog. Throughout the 34 days, Hezbollah continued firing rockets into Israel. Not a trickle, a torrent. Over 4,000 rockets landed in northern Israel over the course of the war. Haifa, Israel's third-largest city, was struck repeatedly. Over 1 million Israelis fled to safer areas or sheltered in bomb rooms for a month. The human cost was severe on both sides. Over 1,200 Lebanese died, the vast majority civilians caught in Israeli airstrikes. Over 160 Israelis died, both soldiers and civilians. Large parts of southern Beirut and southern Lebanon were reduced to rubble. And then, after 34 days, a ceasefire was arranged under UN Security Council Resolution 1701. Israeli forces withdrew. The soldiers, whose capture had triggered the war, were never rescued. They were eventually returned in a prisoner exchange in 2008, in coffins. The result was, by almost any military assessment, a failure for Israel and a remarkable achievement for Hezbollah. Israel had not destroyed Hezbollah's military capability. It had not freed its soldiers. It had not stopped the rockets. It had killed thousands of Lebanese civilians, generating enormous international criticism, and had suffered its most difficult military campaign since the 1973 Yom Kippur War. Hassan Nasrallah, Hezbollah's Secretary General, a compact, black-turbaned man with the oratorical gift of prophet and the strategic mind of general, appeared on television and called a divine victory. Much of the Arab world agreed. The man who had fought Israel for 34 days and not broken had become something close to a hero to hundreds of millions of people who had watched Arab armies crumble before Israel for decades. Hezbollah had achieved something that no Arab military force had done since 1973. It had fought Israel to a standstill. And in the symbolic economy of the Middle East, where dignity and humiliation carry the weight of mountains, That was worth more than any battlefield victory. You cannot tell Hezbollah's story without telling Hassan Nasrallah's story, because Nasrallah is not simply Hezbollah's leader. He is its voice, its symbol, its public face, and, for a generation of followers, almost its spiritual embodiment. He is, by any objective assessment, one of the most consequential political figures in the modern Middle East, and one of the most complex. He was born in 1960, the eldest of 9 children, in a poor neighborhood of East Beirut. His family were Shia Muslims from southern Lebanon. He grew up in the grinding poverty that defined Lebanese Shia life at the time, the poverty that Musa al-Sadr had identified and organized around, the poverty that made young men in the South angry enough to pick up guns. Nasrallah became politically active as a teenager, joining a mall the Shia movement al-Sadr had founded. He was sent to study at the Shia Theological Seminary in Najaf, Iraq, where he was exposed to the ideas of Khomeini and to the revolutionary political theology that would become Hezbollah's ideological backbone. When Saddam Hussein expelled foreign students from Iraqi seminaries in 1978, Nasrallah continued his studies in Qom, Iran, the heart of Khomeini's revolution. He returned to Lebanon and became one of the founders of Hezbollah in 1982. He rose rapidly through the ranks, demonstrating a combination of religious knowledge, political intelligence, and personal courage that made him stand out. By 1992, he was Hezbollah's Secretary General. He has held that position for over 30 years. In that time, he has survived multiple assassination attempts. Israeli intelligence has tried to kill him several times, and he lives under security protocols so tight that virtually nobody outside his immediate circle knows where he is at any given moment. He has rarely been seen in public since 2006, giving his speeches and interviews via video link from undisclosed locations. His speeches are events. When Nasrallah speaks, millions of people across the Arab and Muslim world stop what they are doing and watch. His delivery is precise, methodical, building toward crescendos of rhetorical force that can move crowds to tears or to fury. He speaks in classical Arabic mixed with Lebanese dialect. He is funny, sometimes dark humor, the humor of people who have been through too much. He is devastating in his criticism of Arab governments he regards as collaborators with America and Israel. He is implacable in his commitment to resistance. He has also suffered what no ideology can fully prepare you for. In 1997, his eldest son Hadi was killed fighting Israeli forces in southern Lebanon. Nasrallah appeared on television the following day, composed, and said something that people still quote. He said that he was proud, and that if he had more sons, he would send them too. Whether you regard that as heroism or as something deeply troubling, it tells you something essential about the man and about the movement he leads. The willingness to sacrifice, not abstractly but personally at the cost of your own child, is at the core of Hezbollah's identity. It is the thing that makes ordinary political calculations inapplicable. You cannot buy Nasrallah. You cannot threaten him in ways that make conventional sense. He has already given his son. He lives underground at permanent war. He has organized his entire existence around a cause that he believes in with the totality of his being. This is terrifying if you are his enemy. It is electrifying if you are his follower. And it explains more than any policy paper or military assessment why Hezbollah has endured. The Arab Spring sweeps across the Middle East. In Syria, what begins as peaceful protests against Bashar al-Assad's authoritarian government rapidly turns into something else. Assad security forces open fire on demonstrators. Armed opposition emerges. Outside powers, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, the United States, begin funding and arming various rebel factions. The situation spirals into full-scale civil war. For Hezbollah, Syria presents a problem and an opportunity. The problem: Syria has been Hezbollah's critical supply route for decades. Iranian weapons bound for Hezbollah travel through Syrian territory, over the Syrian-Lebanese border, into Hezbollah's warehouses in Lebanon. If Assad falls, if a Sunni anti-Iranian government comes to power in Damascus, that supply route is cut. Hezbollah's weapons pipeline, the artery that feeds its military power, could be severed. The opportunity: Iran, Assad's primary external patron, needs fighters. The Syrian Arab army is demoralized, depleted, incapable of holding back the rebel tide without help. Iran needs a ground force that it can trust, that is disciplined, that is battle-hardened, and that shares its ideological commitment. Hezbollah is the obvious answer both. The decision is made at the highest levels, by Nasrallah, by Iran's Revolutionary Guard commander Qasem Soleimani, by the Iranian Supreme Leader. Hezbollah will fight in Syria. It begins cautiously. Small units of Hezbollah advisors and fighters appear alongside Syrian government forces in 2012 and 2013. But as the situation deteriorates and rebel forces push Assad's government to the brink of collapse, the commitment grows. Thousands of Hezbollah fighters. Eventually, estimates suggest somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 at the peak, are deployed inside Syria. They fight at Qusair, a strategic city on the Syrian-Lebanese border, taking it from rebel forces after weeks of brutal urban combat. They fight at Aleppo, Syria's second-largest city, in the longest and bloodiest urban battle of the entire civil war. They fight at Homs, at Hama, on the roads leading to Damascus. Everywhere the Assad government is under pressure, Hezbollah fighters appear. The casualties are severe. Over the course of the Syrian civil war, somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 Hezbollah fighters are killed in Syria. For an organization with perhaps 20,000 to 25,000 active fighters, this is a significant loss rate. Funeral processions in Hezbollah's southern Beirut stronghold become a regular feature of life. But the Syria experience transforms Hezbollah in ways that go beyond the casualties. It turns Hezbollah's fighters into combat veterans of a different kind of war. The Lebanese conflict against Israel had been guerrilla warfare, hit and run, ambush and disappear, fight from tunnels and hills. Syria's urban warfare on a massive scale, street by street, building by building, neighborhood by neighborhood, house clearing, artillery support, coordination with armor and air power, combined arms operations at a level that most militias never experience. Hezbollah emerges from Syria as something qualitatively different from what it had been before. Its fighters have been through the most intense combat of their lives. They have learned to coordinate with tanks and aircraft. They have experienced mass casualty engagements. They have fought and won in circumstances that would have broken most military organizations. The Syrian adventure costs Hezbollah dearly in lives and in public opinion. Many Lebanese, including Shia Lebanese, are horrified at the organization's participation in a war that has killed hundreds of thousands of Syrian civilians. Hezbollah's image as a purely Lebanese resistance movement fighting Israel is complicated, perhaps permanently, by its role as a tool of Iranian power projection in a neighboring Arab country's civil war. But militarily, it has made Hezbollah more formidable than ever before. Weapons cost money. Training costs money. Salaries cost money. Schools, hospitals, television stations, reconstruction projects, social welfare programs. All of it costs money. How does Hezbollah pay for it all? The short answer is Iran. Iranian financial support for Hezbollah is estimated at between $700 million and $1 billion per year, according to various Western intelligence assessments. This is the backbone of Hezbollah's finances, the core funding that pays for the weapons pipeline, the military training, the salaries of full-time fighters, and the social programs that buy loyalty in Lebanese Shia communities. But Hezbollah has never been solely dependent on Iranian money. It has built its own financial networks, global, sophisticated, and remarkably resilient to the sanctions and financial pressure that the United States and its allies have applied for decades. Lebanese diaspora communities around the world, in West Africa, South America, North America, Europe, and Australia, have been a significant source of fundraising. Some of this is voluntary, ideological, people who believe in the resistance and want to support it. Some of it is more coercive. Businesses and diaspora communities that are pressured contribute, a kind of revolutionary taxation. West Africa has been particularly important. In countries like Sierra Leone, Ivory Coast, Senegal, and Guinea, Lebanese business communities, many of them with roots in Shia Muslim communities with historical ties to Lebanon, have been identified by American and West African intelligence as sources of Hezbollah fundraising. Diamond trading, gold trading, and other commodity businesses have been used to generate and move money. South America's tri-border area, the junction of Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay, where a large Lebanese diaspora community has lived for generations, became infamous in the 1990s and 2000s as a major Hezbollah fundraising and logistics hub. The 1994 Buenos Aires bombing was planned with connections to this network. Drug trafficking has also been documented as a Hezbollah revenue source. The U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration has identified Hezbollah-connected networks involved in cocaine trafficking from South America to Europe and the Middle East, money laundering through Lebanese banks and real estate, and the financing of weapons purchases through drug proceeds. Hezbollah also has extensive legitimate business interests in Lebanon, construction companies, real estate holdings, import businesses. The Dahi, Hezbollah's stronghold in southern Beirut, is an economic ecosystem unto itself, with Hezbollah-connected businesses dominating large sectors of the local economy. This diversified financial architecture is specifically designed to be resilient. You can sanction Iran and reduce the official funding. You can disrupt one diaspora network and the others keep running. You can arrest a drug trafficker in one country and the network routes around him. No single pressure point can shut down the whole machine. American Treasury Department officials, who spend enormous effort trying to cut off Hezbollah's finances, describe it as one of the most sophisticated financial operations they have ever tried to disrupt. More sophisticated, in some ways, than the financial networks of nation-states. Here is something that often gets lost in the discussion of Hezbollah as a military force. Hezbollah runs Lebanon, not officially, not completely. Lebanon technically still has a president, a parliament, a prime minister, a cabinet. It still has elections, however imperfect. It still has a constitution and a formal government. But Hezbollah has, for the past 2 decades, exercised a veto power over Lebanese politics that no other force can match. It does not need to win every election or hold every ministry. It simply needs to make clear, which it has done repeatedly, including with actual weapons, that nothing significant will happen in Lebanon that Hezbollah does not sanction. The mechanics of this control are worth understanding. In 2008, a dispute between the Lebanese government and Hezbollah escalated when the government tried to shut down Hezbollah's private telecommunications network, a parallel communication system that Hezbollah uses to coordinate its military and political operations, and that the Lebanese government had no access to or oversight of. Hezbollah's response was to send its fighters into the streets of Beirut. In 2 days of fighting, Hezbollah seized control of West Beirut, forced government-aligned militias off the streets, and essentially demonstrated that it could take the capital whenever it chose to. The government backed down. The telecommunications network stayed. The message was clear, and it has never needed to be repeated because it was never forgotten. Hezbollah is the strongest force in Lebanon, and everyone in Lebanon knows it. This creates a profound and tragic problem for the Lebanese state. Lebanon cannot disarm Hezbollah. Its own military is not strong enough. No Lebanese politician who wants to survive politically, or sometimes physically, is willing to seriously push for disarmament. The Lebanese army has a tacit understanding with Hezbollah. We will not challenge you militarily. You will not challenge us institutionally. Lebanon cannot control Hezbollah's foreign policy. Hezbollah makes its own decisions about when to fight Israel, when to send fighters to Syria, when to fire rockets, when to launch operations. The Lebanese government finds out about these decisions when the rest of the world does. After the fact, when the bombs are already falling. This creates a situation of permanent, extraordinary danger for the Lebanese population, because when Hezbollah goes to war, as it did in 2006, as it may again, it is Lebanese territory that is bombed, Lebanese civilians who die, Lebanese infrastructure, roads, bridges, power plants, that is destroyed. The Lebanese state bears the consequences of wars it never authorized and cannot stop. And yet, the Lebanese Shia community, roughly a third of the country, continues by and large to support Hezbollah because Hezbollah provides things that the Lebanese state does not and cannot. Security, services, dignity, and identity, a sense of power in a region where small communities have historically been powerless. This is the trap that Lebanon is in, and there is no easy exit. One of the most unsettling aspects of Hezbollah's power is how far its reach extends beyond Lebanon. The organization has conducted operations on 6 continents. It has cells embedded in communities from Buenos Aires to Bangkok, from Lagos to London. It has surveillance operations running against Israeli and Jewish targets in dozens of countries. And it has conducted assassinations of political figures who threatened its interests, not just in Lebanon, but around the world. In Lebanon itself, the list of political assassinations with credible connections to Hezbollah is devastating. The most significant is the February 2005 assassination of Rafik Hariri, Lebanon's most prominent Sunni politician, a billionaire businessman who had rebuilt Beirut after the Civil War, and who was pushing for Syrian and by extension Hezbollah withdrawal from Lebanese political life. A massive car bomb containing over 1,000 kilograms of TNT detonated in central Beirut, killing Hariri and 21 others. The blast left a crater in the road. The explosion was heard across the city. The United Nations established a special tribunal for Lebanon to investigate the assassination. After years of investigation, the tribunal indicted 4 Hezbollah members in connection with the killing. Hezbollah denied all involvement and refused to hand over the accused. Hariri's assassination triggered the Cedar Revolution, massive street protests that briefly forced Syrian forces out of Lebanon. But it did not stop Hezbollah. It never stops Hezbollah. Beyond Lebanon, Hezbollah's global operations have included the 1992 and 1994 Buenos Aires bombings already mentioned, the 2012 bombing of a tourist bus in Burgas, Bulgaria, that killed 5 Israeli tourists, plots disrupted in Thailand, Cyprus, Peru, Azerbaijan, and multiple other countries, a 2011 plot allegedly involving a Hezbollah-connected Mexican drug cartel member to assassinate the Saudi ambassador to the United States in a Washington, D.C. restaurant. The sophistication and global reach of these operations reflects something important. Hezbollah is not just a Lebanese militia. It is a global intelligence and paramilitary organization that rivals, in some operational capacities, the intelligence services of mid-sized nation-states. This is part why Western governments, particularly the United States, regard Hezbollah as such a serious threat even in years when the organization is not actively conducting operations in the West. The infrastructure is there. The capability is there. The cells are in place. And if Iran ever decides to activate Hezbollah as a global terror weapon in response to an Israeli strike on Iran's nuclear facilities, for example, the consequences could be felt in cities far from the Middle East. October 7, 2023, Hamas launches its devastating attack on Israel. The Middle East explodes, and Hezbollah makes a decision. The decision is not to launch a full-scale war. Not yet, not immediately, but open what Hezbollah calls a support front. Daily exchanges of fire across the Lebanese-Israeli border. Hezbollah rockets and anti-tank missiles targeting Israeli communities in the north. Israeli airstrikes targeting Hezbollah positions in southern Lebanon. A controlled escalation, calibrated to keep pressure on Israel without triggering the full-scale war that both sides understand would be catastrophic. Over the following months, this support front forces the evacuation of over 100,000 Israelis from their homes in northern Israel. The communities of the Galilee, Kiryat Shmona, Metzelah, Nahariya, dozens of villages, empty out. Schools are closed. Agriculture is abandoned. The north of Israel becomes a ghost zone. This is, from Hezbollah's strategic perspective, enormously valuable. It ties down Israeli forces on a second front. It prevents the full weight of Israel's military power being applied solely to Gaza. It demonstrates Hezbollah's willingness to act, and it imposes real costs on Israeli society without crossing the threshold that would trigger all-out war. But Israel is watching, and Israel's patience has limits. In the summer and fall of 2024, Israel begins striking Hezbollah targets with ferocity and sophistication that catches even seasoned observers off guard. First, in a stunning intelligence and technical achievement, Israeli operatives somehow managed to plant explosive devices inside thousands of pagers, handheld communication devices that Hezbollah had switched to specifically because they believed them to be immune to Israeli electronic surveillance. On September 17, 2024, the pagers detonated simultaneously across Lebanon, killing dozens of Hezbollah fighters and officials and wounding thousands. The following day, walkie-talkies used by Hezbollah also exploded. The audacity and reach of the operation was breathtaking. It demonstrated that Israeli intelligence had penetrated Hezbollah's supply chain, had gotten inside the organization's most basic communication infrastructure, in a way that nobody had thought possible. And then, barely a week later, the operation that shook Hezbollah to its foundations. On September 27, 2024, Israeli jets dropped a series of bunker-buster bombs on a Hezbollah command center in the southern suburbs of Beirut. Buried deep beneath the building, in the underground complex that was supposed to be safe, was Hassan Nasrallah. He was killed, the man who had led Hezbollah for 32 years, the man whose voice had moved millions, the man who had survived multiple assassination attempts and who had become, over decades, something close to invincible in the imagination of his followers. Hassan Nasrallah was dead. The shock across Hezbollah, across Lebanon, across the entire Arab and Muslim world was profound. In Iran, senior officials appeared shaken in a way they rarely allow to show publicly. What happens when you kill the most important leader a movement has had for an entire generation? The death of Nasrallah did not destroy Hezbollah. This needs to be said clearly, because there was an initial instinct in some Western coverage to declare Hezbollah finished, decapitated, broken. This is not what happened. Hezbollah is not a personality cult, though Nasrallah's personality loomed enormously over it. It is an institution, 40 years old, with tens of thousands of fighters, a massive weapons arsenal, deep roots in Lebanese Shia society, a financial network spanning continents, and Iranian backing that was not going to disappear because one leader was killed. A new Secretary General was named. Naim Qassem, who had served as Hezbollah's Deputy Secretary General for years, stepped into the leadership. Older, less charismatic than Nasrallah. That comparison is almost unfair to anyone. But experienced, loyal, and capable. But the losses Hezbollah suffered in the fall of 2024 were real and significant. Beyond Nasrallah, the pager operation and subsequent Israeli strikes killed a significant portion of Hezbollah's senior military command, the head of the military wing, senior commanders of various units, intelligence officials, the kind of institutional knowledge and operational experience that cannot be quickly replaced. Israel and Hezbollah reached a ceasefire in late November 2024. Israeli forces, which had made a ground incursion into southern Lebanon, agreed to withdraw. Hezbollah agreed to pull its forces back from the border area, in compliance with the UN Resolution 1701 that had ended the 2006 war, but had never been fully implemented. Whether the ceasefire will hold, whether Hezbollah will use the pause to rebuild, rearm, and reemerge stronger, as is done after every previous conflict, is the central question facing Israeli and Lebanese strategists. History suggests the answer. Here is a question that analysts and policymakers have debated for decades. Is Hezbollah an Iranian proxy, or is it a genuinely Lebanese movement that happens to receive Iranian support? The answer is both, in ways that are not as contradictory as they first appear. Iran created Hezbollah. Iranian money funds it. Iranian weapons arm it. Iranian Revolutionary Guard commanders have trained and advised it from the beginning. The supreme leader of Iran holds a position of extraordinary religious and political authority for Hezbollah's leadership. The concept of Velayat-e Faqih, which places ultimate authority in the hands of the supreme Islamic jurist, create a genuine religious obligation for Hezbollah to follow the supreme leader's guidance. And yet, Hezbollah is not simply a remote control weapon that Tehran fires at will. It has its own leadership, its own strategic assessments, its own relationships within Lebanese society, its own political calculations. There are moments when Hezbollah's interests and Iran's interests align perfectly. The resistance to Israel, the opposition to American power in the region, the support for Palestinian armed groups. And there are moments when they diverge, when Hezbollah must manage Lebanese domestic politics in ways that require nuance and flexibility that pure ideological subservience to Tehran would not allow. The Syria deployment is a good example. Sending Lebanese Shia fighters to kill Syrian Sunnis was deeply damaging to Hezbollah's image in Lebanon and across the Arab world. It was, in many ways, against Hezbollah's own political interests, but it served Iran's interests critically. That Hezbollah did it anyway tells you something about the hierarchy of the relationship. The most accurate description is probably this. Hezbollah is a genuinely Lebanese organization with authentic roots in Lebanese Shia society that also functions as Iran's most important strategic asset in the Arab world. The relationship is less like employer and employee and more like a very close alliance between two parties that share most of their goals and have a deep, decades-long relationship of mutual dependence. Iran needs Hezbollah as its forward deterrent against Israel, the force that holds a gun to Israel's north and threatens massive retaliation if Israel strikes Iran. Without Hezbollah, Iran is further from Israel and more vulnerable to Israeli military action. Hezbollah needs Iran for the weapons, the money, and the ideological backing that gives it legitimacy. Without Iran, Hezbollah's military capability would shrink dramatically. Neither can afford to lose the other, which means the relationship will endure even through setbacks like the loss of Nasrallah, even through the devastation of Israeli military campaigns, even through the exhaustion of endless conflict. Now I want to step back from strategy and weapons and politics and talk about what this all means for the people who live in Lebanon. Because Lebanon is not an abstraction. It is a country of over 5 million people, plus another 1.5 million Syrian refugees who fled to Lebanon to escape their own country's catastrophic war. It is a country of extraordinary culture and talent and resilience. And it is a country that has been paying the price for being Hezbollah's home for 40 years. The October 2019 economic collapse. Lebanon's currency lost over 90% of its value. Savings evaporated. The middle class was destroyed. The World Bank called it one of the worst economic collapses in modern history. Doctors and engineers emigrated by the tens of thousands. The brain drain became a hemorrhage. The August 2020 Beirut port explosion. 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate, improperly stored for years through the criminal negligence of a political class more interested in sectarian patronage than in governance, detonated in the heart of Beirut. The explosion, one of the largest non-nuclear explosions in human history, killed over 200 people, wounded 6,000, and rendered 300,000 people homeless overnight. The blast wave shattered windows across the entire city and was felt as far away as Cyprus. And the Israeli military campaigns. 1982, 1993, 1996, 2006, 2024. Each one leaving destroyed infrastructure, displaced populations, psychological trauma, and economic devastation in its wake. The question that Lebanese people, not Hezbollah's leadership, but ordinary Lebanese people who live with the consequences, have been asking for decades is this: is the resistance worth the price? For Lebanon's Shia community, many of whom have genuine grievances that Hezbollah has genuinely addressed, the answer has historically been yes. The memory of Israeli occupation, the social services, the dignity that comes with belonging to a force that can hold Israel at bay, These things are real and valuable, and they do not disappear just because outsiders question the price. But that consensus is fraying. The 2024 conflict, which devastated large parts of Beirut's southern suburbs and killed hundreds of Lebanese civilians, generated a level of internal criticism of Hezbollah from Lebanese Shia voices, not just Christian or Sunni ones. That would have been almost unthinkable in 2006. People who lost their homes, who lost family members, who watched their neighborhoods reduced to rubble, who were asked to pay the price of a war that Hezbollah had chosen on their behalf without asking. Many of them are angry in ways they are not afraid to express anymore. This internal reckoning within Lebanon's Shia community is one of the most important and underreported stories in the current conflict. It does not mean that Hezbollah is finished politically, but it means that the social contract on which Hezbollah's domestic legitimacy rests is under stress in ways it has not been before. The human cost: is there going to be another war between Israel and Hezbollah? Almost certainly yes. The question is not whether, but when and on what scale. The fundamental dynamic that has produced 5 major Israeli-Lebanese conflicts in 40 years has not been resolved. Hezbollah still exists. It still possesses a massive arsenal. It is still committed to the destruction of Israel as an ideological imperative. Israel still regards Hezbollah as an existential threat that cannot be tolerated indefinitely on its northern border. The 2024 conflict and the ceasefire that ended it have not changed these underlying realities. They have, at most, provided a temporary pause, a chance for Hezbollah to rebuild and rearm, a chance for Israel to consolidate its intelligence advantage and prepare for the next round, a chance for diplomats and international organizations to paper over cracks and pretend that the architecture of peace is more robust than it is. What would the next full-scale war look like? Israeli military planning has for years been focused on 2 scenarios. The first is a war that Israel initiates, triggered either by a Hezbollah operation that crosses an Israeli red line or by Israel's decision that it can no longer tolerate Hezbollah's buildup and needs to degrade it decisively. In this scenario, Israel would attempt to use its massive air superiority to destroy as much of Hezbollah's arsenal as possible in the opening hours of the conflict. The first strike approach. Hundreds of airstrikes simultaneously, hitting pre-identified weapons storage sites, command centers, and rocket launcher positions. The goal would be to eliminate as much of Hezbollah's capability as possible before it can be used. The problem with this scenario is that despite Israel's intelligence capabilities, Hezbollah has gone to extraordinary lengths to disperse and harden its arsenal. Many of the 150,000 rockets and missiles are stored in civilian homes, in mosques, in schools, precisely because Hezbollah knows that Israel will hesitate to strike these targets given civilian casualties that would result. The proportion of Hezbollah's arsenal that Israel could realistically eliminate in opening strikes is significant but not comprehensive, which means a sustained rocket campaign against Israeli cities is essentially guaranteed. The second scenario is a war Hezbollah initiates, either because Iran decides a moment is right to put maximum pressure on Israel, or because a miscalculation escalates into something neither side intended. In this scenario, the opening salvo from Hezbollah could be thousands of rockets and missiles fired simultaneously, designed to overwhelm Israeli air defenses through sheer volume. Either way, the war that military planners fear most involves thousands of rockets landing in Israeli cities over days or weeks, with casualties that could run into the hundreds or potentially thousands. and Israeli military operations in Lebanon that would cause death and destruction on a scale that would dwarf 2006. The ceasefire of November 2024 bought time. Time for diplomacy that may or may not materialize. Time for the implementation of security arrangements that may or may not hold. Time, perhaps, for the political conditions in Lebanon to shift in ways that reduce Hezbollah's freedom of action, or time simply for the next round of conflict that neither side has found a way to end. At the end of this long journey, through the rubble of Beirut, through the tunnels of southern Lebanon, through the coffins of soldiers and civilians and the speeches of leaders who sent other people's sons to die, what have we learned? Hezbollah teaches us something profound and uncomfortable about power. It teaches us that military might, however overwhelming, cannot solve problems that are fundamentally political and social. Israel has the most sophisticated military in the Middle East. It has nuclear weapons. It has the backing of the United States. It has the Iron Dome and the Arrow system and the F-35 and the intelligence capabilities of Mossad. And after 40 years of fighting Hezbollah, killing its fighters, destroying its infrastructure, assassinating its leaders, Hezbollah is more powerful today than it was when it was founded, because the conditions that created Hezbollah, the marginalization of Lebanon's Shia community, the Palestinian dispossession, the Israeli occupation, the failure of the Lebanese state, the Iranian revolutionary project, those conditions were never addressed. And an organization that grows from genuine grievances, that provides genuine services, that fights against a genuine occupation, cannot simply be bombed out of existence, because every bomb that misses its target and kills a civilian is a recruitment poster. Every displaced family is a new generation of fighters. Hezbollah also teaches us about the extraordinary staying power of ideology combined with social services, combined with military capability. This is a model that has been studied and replicated. Hamas in Gaza built itself on the Hezbollah template, the Houthis in Yemen, various other armed movements across the Muslim world. The playbook is understood. Build a military wing, build a social welfare network, wrap it all in religious legitimacy, and you create something that is extraordinarily difficult to destroy because it is embedded in the community it claims to represent. Hezbollah teaches us about the power of the long game. The Revolutionary Guard commanders who drove into the Bekaa Valley in 1982 were not thinking about the next election cycle or the next fiscal quarter. They were thinking in decades. They were building something designed to last and to grow. 40 years later, their investment has paid returns that dwarf anything they could have imagined in those early years. And perhaps most painfully, Hezbollah teaches us about what happens to ordinary people caught between forces larger than themselves. The Lebanese civilians who have lost their homes in Israeli airstrikes. The Israeli civilians who have sheltered from Hezbollah rockets. The young Hezbollah fighters who died in Syria fighting someone else's war. The Lebanese politicians who want to govern their country, but find themselves unable to make basic decisions because a militia holds a veto over everything. All of them are caught in the gears of a machine that was built by decisions made before they were born, by powers operating on scales they cannot influence, toward goals that do not include their safety or their dignity. What would end this? Not military victory. That has been attempted and has always failed to resolve the underlying conflict. Not sanctions. Decades of economic pressure have not dislodged Hezbollah from its position in Lebanese society. What might work, what has a theoretical possibility of working, is the combination of things that have ended other intractable conflicts in other parts of the world. A Lebanese state that is genuinely strong enough and legitimate enough to provide what Hezbollah provides: security, services, dignity, without the weapons and the wars. This would require a fundamental reform of Lebanon's sectarian political system, an end to the corruption that has stolen the country's future, and an international investment in Lebanese state capacity that has never materialized. A resolution of the Palestinian question that removes the fuel from the engine of resistance, an actual Palestinian state, with actual sovereignty, actual borders, actual dignity. Not a performance of peace, but a genuine end to an occupation that has been grinding on for over 70 years. A relationship between Iran and the international community that addresses Iran's legitimate security concerns while constraining its destabilizing behavior. The kind of diplomatic architecture that has diffused other seemingly irresolvable confrontations in history. None of these things are easy. All of them require compromise from people who believe compromise is betrayal. All of them require political will that is currently absent from every relevant government. But the alternative is more of what we have seen. More wars, more funerals, more children in rubble, more cycles of destruction and reconstruction and destruction again, more decades of conflict that produces nothing but suffering and leaves both sides further from safety than they were before. Hezbollah was born in war. It has lived in war. It is prepared for more war. The question is whether the rest of us, the governments, the international institutions, the people with power to change things, are finally willing to try something else. The children sheltering in Beirut's southern suburbs deserve better. The children sheltering in Kiryat Shmona deserve better. The children of Lebanon, of Israel, of Palestine, they did not choose this inheritance. They did not ask to be born into a conflict that was old before their grandparents were young. They deserve a world in which the party of God is a memory, not a military force. Building that world is the hardest thing anyone could ask for, and the cost of not building it has already been paid in blood. Too many